Today I'd like to talk about the connection between my iPhone number 5 and the weekly portion of Behar-Bechukotai. One of the central sections of the weekly portion is the Tochecha, the section of rebuke which is found in Vayikra chapter 26. And as you know, it says in the first half that if you obey God's commandments, He will reward you. And if you transgress God's commandments, then He will punish you. And there's a long list of punishments which will happen to the Jewish people. I would like to concentrate on just 2 verses. It says in the list of blessings, and your threshing shall reach to the vintage, and the vintage shall reach to the sowing time, and you shall eat your bread to the full. The Hebrew says, V'achaltem lachmechem lasova. While we are told in the list of klalot, of curses, and when I have broken the staff of your bread, 10 women shall bake bread in one oven, and they shall return you by your bread by weight, and you shall eat and not be satisfied. The Hebrew, V'achaltem v'lo tisbau. The second verse begs an explanation. Since the opposite of satiation is famine, the verse should have said, and you shall not eat and not be satisfied. Indeed, this was already noted by the classic commentators such as Ibn Ezra in the 12th century. He wrote, a person who is hungry can be satisfied by a small amount of food, but you shall not be satisfied by much food. In other words, the curse is not a lack of food, but rather the inability to be satisfied. You will eat and eat and eat and still not be satisfied. This is one of the major curses of the Western world today. We eat and eat and eat and are not satisfied. We buy and buy and buy, and it is not enough. A few examples will suffice. We eat too much, we become overweight, we lose weight, and we gain weight again, and you shall eat and not be satisfied. In Israel, we went from 1 television station to 2, to 60 channels on cable, to satellite, to Netflix, and you shall eat and not be satisfied. We went from a typewriter to the 286, the 386, the 486, the Pentium, the portable computer, the tablet, the iPhone 1 through 10. The latest model I looked up today is called the SE 2020. And of course, we went from 3G to 4G to 5G. You shall eat and not be satisfied. It was not always like this in Israel. Until the Six-Day War, life in Israel was much more modest. I still remember the first time I met my Aunt Miriam Golinkin, Zichronah Livracha. She came to visit us in the States in 1963. And every time she used a tissue, she would take a 2-ply tissue and split it in 2 and use 1 layer of the tissue. We cannot return to that simple form of life and more modest way of life in the land of Israel. But we must teach our children to be satisfied with what is necessary and not to buy things for the sake of buying things. How can we teach them this message? There are 2 ways of doing so. We must emphasize the Jewish value of being satisfied with little, which is reflected in a number of well-known sources. For example, in the book of Kohelet, Ohev kesef lo yisba kesef. He who loves money shall not be satisfied with money. And we have learned in the Tosefta and the Tractate of Brachot, whoever is satisfied with his lot, it is a good sign for him. Whoever is not satisfied with his lot, it is a bad sign for him. And so we have learned in Pirkei Avot chapter 4, Ben Azai says, Ezu ashir hasameach bechelko. Who is wealthy? He who is satisfied with his lot. We must also emphasize that there is a substitute for pursuing physical possessions. We can pursue spiritual goals. Not only is it permissible to run after Torah, but the more running, the better. As we have learned once again in Pirkei Avot, chapter 2, Marbeh Torah, Marbeh Chayim. He who increases Torah increases life. And so we learn in Eruvin folio 54a, why are the words of Torah compared to a fig tree? Just as a fig tree, whenever a person feels it, he finds figs on it, so words of Torah, whenever a person dwells on them, he finds meaning in them. Finally, there is a saying which is the exact opposite of the verse from Kohelet, which we mentioned above. It's found in Dvarim Rabbah. Ohev Torah, lo yizba Torah. He who loves Torah shall not be satisfied with Torah. These then are 2 educational methods for combating the materialism of our time. To teach the value of being satisfied with little, and to teach that increasing our knowledge of Torah is a substitute for increasing our physical possessions. May it be God's will that we be wise enough to educate in this fashion, so that we may see the fulfillment of the verse. And I quote, "And the threshing shall reach the vintage, and the vintage shall reach the sowing time, and you shall eat your bread to the full, and dwell in your land in safety." And now you know why I still use an iPhone number 5. Shavua Tov from Schechter.